17:45 UK time. So let's make a start. First of all, I should say thank you very much to Mo and Nadem, who have been fully, connected with everything all day, and Mo's been sharing, and Nadem's been doing all of the tech support behind the scenes, clicking the invites into the meeting and everything, and making sure we're recorded. So that's all great. All the recordings will be made available after the event. There's been so much happening. I've not even had time to live tweet, which I normally try and do for events, but the day's really flown by, and hopefully we've got all of the keynote speakers back. If you can switch your cameras on, if possible. I think I saw, Steve's there as well. So we've only got 45 minutes, so I have a handful of questions, and I probably won't ask each of the keynote speakers each question because we'll be here till midnight. But I'll probably start picking on people in a nice way as possible. And for the other keynote speakers, if you want to answer that particular question, just raise your hand and we'll spot that and hopefully pick that up. So what I was going to do is paste the questions in to the chat as I go. So for the rest of you in the audience, if you want to answer those questions in the chat, please go ahead while we're discussing. So my first question for the panel, as you can see there, is what are the most most important takeaway messages that you've picked up from today's keynote talks? And obviously you're not allowed to pick your own keynote talk when you're answering that, please. So yeah, I think most people have been around most of the day. So you've been watching other keynote speakers talk and hopefully ingesting all of that information. What do you think are the 1 to 2 most important takeaway messages? Maybe I should start with Jochen, since he was our first speaker and he's been listening the rest of the day. Jochen, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I thought about it, and I think the one takeaway for me is we really have, not just in finance, but certainly also in finance, we have really arrived at the information age. I remember the time when this term was coined and kicked around, and it was a bit laughable. So people tried to make it sound as if we had the information age, but it was really clear to everybody that it wasn't the case, right? So people barely had emails and so on. And now if we look at finance today, there are really a lot of online processes for end consumer, for traders. People sit on their terminal and they can turn around millions with a mouse click or with a key press. And that's something that I think should be said. And the second thing is that's connected with it, as NLP people, this means that because there's text involved, there's a lot of non-text involved. A lot of people think finance is probably only about numbers, but there we have seen today there is a lot of text involved, and that means that there's an awful lot to do for the likes of us, and that's actually fantastic. So we have amazing opportunities. So I think that's my sort of second takeaway. And if I may add a 0.2.5 is I take away personally for me that I want to do something with different languages now, because the Spanish talk about Spanish language by Antonio inspired me to think about, okay, how are these finance systems slightly different in different countries, and how are people talking about finance differently? I have mostly worked, frankly, on English. I'm a German citizen. I speak a little bit of Spanish, but not very well. Just more passive understanding from school days. And I think I would be excited to do some experiment there. I don't know what it might be in the future, but that's kind of what I'm taking away from this. And there were lots of other bits of everybody's talk that have created similar inspiration. So thanks to everybody for being just amazing.
Yeah, completely agree with the everybody being amazing, and also the multilingual kind of challenge. I think that's definitely the way forward. So I can't see any particular hands up from other panelists, so I'm going to pick on somebody else. Vasiliki, how about you? You did a third talk, so you've been listening as well throughout the day. What's your key takeaways?
There's so many. I kind of have a couple in mind. In terms of my personal, I have been thinking of things that I haven't shared in today's talk about how with machine learning and AI and everything is about, and even the NLP methods, we're losing track of what really matters sometimes, and how we could start from scratch and let a little bit the users tell us a little bit what really matters. So like Kim, we have been also deliberating on, and like Steve mentioned, on allowing the users, like Steve mentioned the disclosure words, we are also allowing and the user perspective to tell us a little bit more about the financial narratives property that matters, rather than just taking off the shelf scores. And the other key takeaway, I think that is really, really crucial, is how to advance. We need to really, on the way forward, we really need to embrace the multiple disciplines, not only in linguistics, but also psychology. I was fascinated by Claire's talk, and I'm so much into mental health and any sort of health issues at workplace, and I think it is important that everybody's on board, education, regulators. We all have to just start rethinking fundamentals here and allow for the disciplines to merge more. I asked a question, Steve, about, he mentioned about research excellence exercise in Britain and how the impact in the community has become to take more prominence, which has been the case in Canada. And I was thinking, how about, do we really rate and do we really appreciate the merging of the disciplines, right? Because I knew so far from my years in Britain that was quite an issue. So, yeah.
Interesting. It's really tricky, as Steve was saying, to bridge these silos. Most definitely. So last chance for hands up, otherwise I'm going to pick on Antonio to give us his 1 to 2 key takeaways, please. Oh, I think you muted.
Sorry, Paul, can you repeat?
Okay. Yeah, just to answer that first question, Antonio, if you have any key takeaways that you've seen from the other talks the rest of the day, what were your 1 to 2 key takeaway messages?
Yeah, well, I particularly like the talk by Steve when he was talking about the problems with the NLP people and the financial expert. And I remember my time trying to, as a linguist, to decipher the messages. And the sample Steve gave about equity, or I don't remember the other one. But I mean, you need to know the language of the financial narratives. Otherwise, it's impossible you really understand. And that is why it's hard for NLP people and for linguists to understand the narratives. So definitely, I think the accounting and the financial expert must guide the question. It's some of the things I proposed to my fellow Anna Hisbert. She must decide what is the real topics of the investigation, because all of this is for the financial people, not for the computer scientists or for the linguist. So it's very, very important. It's like if you are a doctor, you are trying to develop, you are a computer scientist and you want to develop some kind of prediction of maladies or whatever, you need to count on the things of the medical doctor know. So in this case, the financial experts must guide things, because otherwise, for us, I mean, you need a help from them, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
yeah, having research questions from
right.
each of the
Right. Yes. What you need. What is what you want to extract from here. So in that case, we can focus. Of course, we know something about linguistics features or whatever, but we need what the things they want to solve.
Exactly. Yeah. I see a hand up. I think Dominique, do you want to join in?
Yeah. Hello. I think our main takeaway will probably a comment Joran made in the chat regarding that you should never demand magic from the machine, meaning something that human can do based on the same data. And I think it's summarized it quite well, the need for interdisciplinarity, how you need to have, for instance, linguist exchange with expert knowledge and data engineers. And it's sometimes very, in practice, can be sometimes very challenging to have all these persons interact in the same room. But when you succeed in doing this, I think you can build really meaningful insights for the field. And the other thing is we really need corpus. You worked a lot on that, I know, at Lancaster, providing corpuses, and we are very grateful for that. And the last thing is evaluation. The thing we dream about is having recognized academic metric that we could exhibit to our clients saying, look, this is our score on this well-known metric, and for now all we have is blue, and we all know it doesn't do the job. But that's, yeah, something we would be very interested in working on also.
Yeah, that's great, because that actually leads on to the second question that I wanted to pose, but slightly distracted by Steve's cat there, who just wandered across the, the picture. We have to have a cat. That's obligatory in all Teams and Zoom meetings. Thanks, Dominique, and everybody who answered that one. So let's turn to the second question that I drafted for you, kind of linking in with what Dominique was saying there. What's the main thing that you see is missing in the current academic research being undertaken on financial narrative processing? I mean, maybe I could come to you, Steve, because you kind of reflected on this a little bit in your talk. Can I pass that to you and your cat?
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want me to answer, Paul, or would you prefer the cat to answer?
You choose.
We might get more sense from the cat. I think the big issue for me is marrying up the text with the visuals, the visual aspect of information. So when you look at a lot of financial communication, you see a lot of text, but that's combined with a lot of graphics, a lot of visuals that are a key part of the story. And we don't really have a good way at the moment of marrying those two pieces of information up. And I think there's probably a danger that if we focus solely on the text and exclude the visuals, then we're either missing a key part of the story, or potentially we're getting the message wrong. So, you could go from kind of simple stuff like emojis in social media, and people are already starting to work on that a little bit because that's easy. But then you go through to something complex like an annual reports, where you've got the narrative accompanied by graphs, charts, figures, and you can't really understand the narrative unless you understand the charts, because they're an integral part of the story. And so I think being able to reflect that richness of the way information is presented, rather than just focusing on pure text, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Yeah,
definitely agree. That's an important point. Sometimes in social media, the emoji can completely change the sentiment, right? So I love Trump heart or smiley emoji, probably tells you that I really don't. But equally, presumably in the financial PDFs, the larger glossy brochures, you have a lot more information than that in the graphics and the information visualization there that we are.
Yeah, I think that's right, Paul. And I think if we could get a handle on that sort of information, it provides quite an interesting way of drilling down into whether the text is telling us a coherent story or whether there's a kind of mismatch between the evidence and management's interpretation of that evidence. So it potentially gives us a more interesting window into impression management and obfuscation and that sort of area, which I think is potentially very interesting.
Yeah. There's a hand up. Thanks, Steve. There's a hand up from you, I think. Do you want to join in?
Yes, I wanted to mention also something in between. I totally agree with the point on figures and on drawings, etc. But there's also something in between the text and the figures, which is the tables and the data tables, which is usually very poorly handled by NLP process. And there might be also richness and to check coherence between the text and the data table, and if there is a line that is highlighted, bold line, you should look at this, and this is something that we do not handle, in fact, or very poorly.
Yeah, so that's really a key requirement for moving forward. Presumably, this information is not in the US filings at all because they're HTML or text, so I understand it. But in pretty much all of the other languages and countries and contexts, this could completely change things in terms of visuals. I mean, coming back to the question about what's missing in the current academic research, I was going to turn to Claire at this point. I mean, it may be a really hard or a really difficult, easy question to ask you because you're kind of coming at it from outsider's perspective, coming in and seeing what we've done so far. I'll mute so that we don't get echo.
Okay. It's actually really hard because I don't think I really know the financial narrative processing literature at all, really. So it's quite hard to say. But if I mean, tell me if this exists or not. But I know when I've been involved in other research projects where we've looked at health information presented online. We did comparisons of the influence of kind of narrative text, what we would classify as personal stories that are being shared and testimonials versus kind of the facts and figures and things. And I suspect in the financial reporting, you generally have the facts and the figures and the tables and stuff, but no other kind of information presented in reports. But what I think Kim was talking about notes, I don't know what, so I'm completely ignorant to this, but I don't know what they have in the notes and what kind of messages they're saying, but what influence that has. And I know we did some eye tracking experiments, getting people to look at this information, that kind of narrative information, look at the facts and figures, and also look at tables and presentations and layouts and things. And it actually does seem to make a difference to how trustworthy people felt like that document or that website was. So I don't know if that exists or whether it's relevant, but from an outsider looking in, I don't know, that might be something.
Thanks. Anybody you want to come back in on that? I mean, Kim, maybe you want to follow up on the notes, but does anybody know if people have done research on the kind of eye tracking or what people focus on when they're reading, as Claire says, the either annual reports or any other type of financial narratives. Anybody know? Steve?
Sorry, Kim, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say, if you're doing eye tracking, you probably will find that nobody looks at the notes. That would be your conclusion. So the notes are just basically expanding on the details. It's still factual for the most part, just factually expanding on the details and adding a lot of. I have seen, and I don't know the literature very well, but images also like gender, the women versus men and how they're positioned, how they look. And there's a lot of images of people in the annual report, and how do people interpret that? Does it affect their perception of the annual report?
Okay, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say that there is some work looking at using eye tracking technology. It tends to fall under this sort of subheading of, they call it neuro accounting. But yeah, they've done quite a lot of work on what attracts the reader on the page, which is quite interesting, I think. And speaking directly to Claire's point, I mean, you do find in disclosures like the annual report, you do find examples of personal testimony. So quite a lot have things like case studies in them, in a sidebar that try to provide an example that brings alive what the sort of message that the company is trying to communicate. And so I think it's quite interesting, maybe, how much traction you get from those disclosures, whether people believe it or whether they just think it's impression management. And they disregard it. I think there's some really interesting questions around that.
Thanks. Mo, do you want to join in? And again, I'll mute so we don't get any.
Okay. I think what I feel missing is, so recently Kim and I, and also Vasiliki, were talking to a researcher in Denmark, and we found that they've got a lot of data about people. So people of Denmark in everything. So how many times they went to hospital, how many kids, adoption and everything, what sector they worked in. And we found that you can actually link that to the sectors they worked in, and then kind of like link all that financial work that you've got to somewhere else that has like a real effect. So I think that's what we're missing, at least in the UK, like from what I see, like we only judge the financial data or the financial analysis we do on the financial market, but we never seen outside of that. So that's just the part I think is missing in there.
Yeah. Okay, Steve, you got your hand up.
Yeah, so I think Mo's point is a great one. Those data sets from Denmark, I think they have that sort of data to some degree in Finland and Sweden as well. That data's already been started to be used in finance, albeit at the margins, and there's some really interesting opportunities, I think, around that. I think the other thing where I think there's opportunity is, and this is only really for certain types of document like the annual report, but how information is presented on the page. So things like font size and whether it's in bold and how it's positioned on the page. I mean, management are presenting information in that way because they think it makes a difference, I presume. So, they're pulling out quotes, they're putting them at certain points on the page because they think that that's going to affect the way readers interpret the information. But at the moment, when we process text, we treat that page as really just all text is the same. And I'm not sure all text is the same. And I think it'd be quite interesting if we could get a bit more granularity on that.
Yeah. Jochen, your comment was a couple of minutes back, but I don't know whether you wanted to come in on these points. Yeah, oh, you're muted. Still muted. No, can't hear you.
Apologies, I was muted. There's one piece of text that is indeed very different from all the others. If I may, I would like to comment on that. It's the text that is not there. So one thing that I recently got my interest is stuff that is left out. And this is particularly interesting in the news, underreporting, but it's also interesting for companies in the ESG area. Sometimes, if things are going well, something is reported. Let's say carbon emissions, are going down. But then if you have a sudden spike, you will find that the next year that category will just not be reported because there are no mandatory reporting guidelines. And therefore, people just say what they want to say. And the comparison and benchmarking is just fairly difficult. Not even to mention the whole greenwashing area, and that of course also strongly interacts with what we talked about: metaphor, non-literal language, and persuasion, of course. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do there that has to do with language and also with new regulation that may force certain reporting so that the numbers come out there. Yeah, we heard earlier that sometimes the bad numbers are just not mentioned, and people should not get away with it. That's not a linguistic element, but then when they say things about the numbers, then it's a task for the linguist to kind of make sense of it.
Yeah, but obviously really difficult for NLP and linguistics to analyze things that aren't there.
Yeah, so it's possible by just looking what is reported in the others, and then that kind of creates a category. And then there's a data gap in some of the data records. So that can lead to an aha effect.
Right.
The empty string and its informativity.
Yes. Hugh?
Yet, regarding the text and the way it's written, I found very interesting the job presented by Kim and Mo. And in fact, we usually treat one document as a whole and well, try to find out some sentiment, for example, out of 100 pages, and it has no sense. Every section is written for a given goal, for a given reader, etc. And we should absolutely go deeper into what makes the different parts of these reports, and what is the message for what is the intended reader of this given part or this other, in order to really find useful insights.
Yeah. Anybody else want to comment on this question before I move on to the third one? We're roughly 2/3 of the way through the panel. So, Steve.
Yeah. Just quickly coming back to Joachim's point. So what's missing? So I mean, I share your interest, Joachim, because I think that's absolutely right, particularly in a discretionary disclosure setting, which is often what we're dealing with a lot of annual reports. I think there's opportunities. You said, Paul, it's hard to get a handle on things that aren't disclosed. I think there's good opportunities to triangulate through different data sets. So just thinking about the stuff that Claire was talking about this afternoon about well-being, one of the ways potentially you could get at whether the company message that it's putting through its annual report about its workforce and its well-being, it actually reflects reality, is to triangulate that message with something like data from Glassdoor. So Glassdoor is a social media platform where employees are essentially commenting on their company and the reality of that. And so joining those messages up and seeing where there's consistency and seeing where there's inconsistency is potentially a nice way of getting an insight into the message that the company's putting out.
Yeah, so you can see the differences between maybe the same company from one year to the next to find a way that there is a gap or something that they've taken out from previous year's narratives, perhaps. Claire, did you want to follow up on that? You had your hand up at one point.
Just post the little.
Right. Okay, cool. Vasiliki.
I just wanted to add to that, because on Joachim's point and to add into what Steve said, on greenwashing, I mean, triangulating datasets is interesting. So on greenwashing, one way to kind of try to capture the non-disclosed bit. There have been some attempts to compare the disclosed, whatever you see in the reports, compared to what disclosures would have mattered. So there are independent data providers that are trying to approximate this. So there are some attempts, Jochen, to actually kind of capture this invisible hand, these attempts of greenwashing attempts or lack of corporate culture. But I would agree and would step on that to also say that there is what you stress as mattering, which is corporate culture, is something that the recent evidence, survey evidence, and evidence from interviews actually raises, which kind of made me think that we really have to embrace mixed methods and to allow interviews to inform a little bit our investigations before we start digging and going nuts with NLP methods and machine learning. I think we really need to allow for some insights on how things and what things really matter.
Yeah. Thumbs up from Steve there. So I'm going to use that chance to jump to the third question, which is really 2 questions for the price of 1. So I've just posted that into the chat again. How can accounting, computer science, linguistics, and other academic disciplines work together better in the future? And then a supplementary question, I guess, aimed at our non-academic participants. How should we engage stakeholders outside academia better in the future? I mean, we've heard, I think, largely from computer science, NLP, and accounting and finance today, but also, obviously, one of the things we do in Lancaster is work really closely together with linguistics, and Claire's brought in psychology, health and medicine, mental health, and other issues as well, which are really vital to look at. So, we should be not thinking in the box at all anymore. So, Kim, do you want to start on that one? And then I'll come to Raymond.
Well, first of all, I have to thank you guys for putting this together, because this is the type of things that does lead to, cross-pollination, sharing of ideas, learning what other people are doing. So this has been an excellent opportunity to move things forwards. And I've sensed there's probably a few collaborations that are going to come out of this exercise just on its own. So it's excellent. So maybe a bit more of this as one way to move the field forward.
Great. I think Mo has some plans in that area. Raymond, do you want to jump in at this point?
Yes. So again, a quick shout out to organizers and also all the keynote speaker. I think it is extremely encouraging to hear from different speakers about, for example, Jochen talk about using NLP methods in dealing with financial problem, looking at more non-structured data, and then Steve talked about the synergy, and also we saw examples from Clara, which is actually a promising fruits, results from these interdisciplinary research, etc., etc. So it is important and encouraging to see different sides has that desire to work closely together. Particularly nowadays, we have these big beasts of machine learning solutions or tools to solve different problems. So it's really a great time and a good chance that we can use different experts and different brains together. I think as a reflection, we are doing similar exercise within a company environment. Obviously, I'm not totally with a background of academia from now, but in a company environment, I am perceived to be the more on the academic side. So I will play a role of an academic sometimes, and then say, hey, let's invest a little bit efforts on doing something great, which has strategic value, which will bring us a longer way. And then I think it is all about value and value-driven exercise, whether this is small, great, as long as we are aligned with the same value, and then we see great things to do, to discover something, to help us understanding something, or to actually bring actual value in the product. I think these will be all very appealing exercise for us to collaborate and continue.
Thanks, Raymond. Dominique.
Yes, no, I just wanted to reinforce a bit what Raymond just said. We have tons of use cases. Not all of them fit for our business, but some of them might be useful in the research environment. For research, we could pull them into research, but we don't have time. So I don't know if there is a way to do sort of a use case bank or something, but we could maybe brainstorm on that and see if some of them could be useful for research. That was it.
Thanks. And I realise I've not been keeping up with the chat. Kim, did you want to come back on that one, or was it just something?
I just agree, and I'd love to chat with you, Dominic, about cases that I think would be lovely to pull out and put some academic spin to it. So cool. Let's chat later.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have GatherTown running all day tomorrow, won't we, as well, for people to chat separately if they want to follow up. And obviously there's other ways of communicating. We have numerous video conferencing systems in the world these days. Cool. Vasiliki, you have your hand up.
So since we're on the subject, and it's surprising, you may want to consider for the future, both for Europol and Mo, the Financial Reporting Lab of the UK Financial Reporting Council is organizing it seems to be almost an annual event now, when they bring together investors, representatives, regulators, educators, to brainstorm more financial narratives in annual reports. And I think it would be great if there's a bridging to this, so you can actually kind of merge your resources there. You can't participate with one another and invite them, because the ICAW as well is really keen on annual reports. So I don't know whether in the future you plan to increase the scope of this workshop to reach out towards non-academic audiences, pretty much like the ICAW does in their events.
Is there a link Vicky, for that? Is it a public?
I can give you, the FRC is actually, everything they do it, they publish it on their websites, the FRC websites, and the lab is under their auspices, so they would publish there. And the ICAW is actually running 2 events per year where they have a huge audience of academics and regulators. The interesting of the lab is that they bring investors as well. So it is really, I would see it brilliant if part of that workshop, for example, the lab is organizing, includes an academic panel as well, because they have quite a lot of investor representatives there. So it would be brilliant if we actually, you can reach out and produce a joint event even.
Yeah, is it partly a trade event? Do they have, Steve organised things here in the past where you expose the techniques and methods to people, and with a hands-on kind of lab? Is it that kind of lab, or is it something else?
Just an interface, really. They call it the lab to just reflect it's a getting together of different parties to discuss what matters in annual reports. So I see it as a perfect fit. And they do have academic representatives, but they're not as many, right? And especially not financial narratives representatives. That would be even more awesome. So I could give you, in the future, you could reach out to some key people that are really interested in those matters, both ICAW contacts and FRC contacts.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. So I've posted a thing in the chat. If any questions want to come in from the audience, please post them in at this point before we finish. I don't know, Mo, do you want to say anything before we end the day? Otherwise, I can just wrap up. Up to you.
No, I'm just if I can.
If there's any other, points that the panel want to make before we finish that we've not had a chance to come in on any of the questions that we've covered, I think I've given everybody a chance to speak at least with one of the questions, if not both. Well, 2 of the questions. All right, I shall call it a day there for the panel. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining in on that. We have this recorded as well, so you can relive the experience at a later date. And I think I'm going to pass back to Mo at this point, just to wrap up for the day. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool.
That's a very long year. Yes, so I was telling Paul today that I might struggle to think of a favorite talk. So I think all the talks were brilliant, loads of ideas, different topics. Despite talking about financial narratives, it tells you the diversity in there in terms of data and in terms of methods, and the needs as well are completely different when we talk about corporate and then academia. I quite like that. I like the different languages as well. And I really look forward for collaborating with all of you and seeing you in person, hopefully in the next FNP workshop. So what I'm going to say is we still have one day to go. So tomorrow is a day busy with like authors and participants of the FNP workshops. So we've got 5 main workshop papers, and we also have the shared tasks and the shared tasks winners. In addition to poster sessions, so the programs is in the link I sent with you. It'll be great if you can attend, and I'm sure those participants will love to hear from your experience. So this day is approaching to the end. I think you all want to have a break from us, but I really appreciate you all attending, and it was so exciting for me. This is like a wonderful day. I really loved it, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
See you tomorrow, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Great
Thank
job.
you. Bye. Good night.